Hello, this is Grandmaster Max Dlugy with Defensive Chess. I'd like to show you from my own games how to play positions where you are attacked, how to find chances in defensive positions, and to make the most out of them. So let's take a look at the first game I want to show you, game between Ruslan Goletiani, one of the best women's chess players in the United States, and myself at the US Championship 2006. Ruslan had white, and she opened up with knight f3. I played d5, g3, and this sort of unconventional move, knight c6, threatening to play e5, after which my center position would be very good. White played d4, correctly stopping the move e5, and I played bishop g4, again trying to get in the move e5 after bishop takes knight. White plays bishop g2, again stopping my e5 advance, because after bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, e5 would not work because pawn takes pawn, hitting the pawn on d5. Now I played e6, which may not be the best move. Queen d7 is worth looking at, but I decided it was too risky, and so played the move e6. White castled. I played knight f6, some developing move, and now white played a very calm move c3. Now it looks like c4 is another good possibility, which probably transposes into the Catalan, but black can probably get a reasonable game after pawn takes pawn, queen a4, knight d7, following up with knight b6 and some pressure on the d4 pawn. So instead white decided to play very calmly c3, and I also make a simple developing move, bishop d6. Once again eyeing e5 as an important square to fight for. So white develops knight d2, I castle, and she plays rook e1. Now clearly white wants to get in e4, and if I could stop it, I'd love to, but it's not that easy. For example, if now I break first with e5, white continues in a very straightforward fashion. Pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and now the move queen b3 is very hard to meet, because now if rook b8, white plays e4, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn. Taking the knight would be wrong now, because rook takes knight would actually attack two bishops at the same time. So probably rook e8, and now a very good move is queen a4, eyeing both the bishop on g4 and the pawn on a7. And it's quite possible that black is simply quite a bit worse in this position. So seeing that direct play doesn't quite work, I looked also at the move bishop f5, but the problem there is that white simply plays knight h4, again fighting for the c4 square, but also trying to get this bishop on f5. And if white gets the bishop on f5, later he comes with queen b3. For example, if knight e7, knight takes f5, knight takes f5, queen b3, followed up by e4, and white will stand better thanks to the two bishops. So I had to look for something else, and I found a move that I think is quite good, knight e7. Now the idea of knight e7 is to play either c6 or c5, and basically the knight was a bit misplaced on c6, and so moving the knight to any of the squares like g6 or f5, or even back to c6 after I play c5 made sense to me. Now white continues to develop his pieces. After knight d7, he plays queen he plays e4 immediately, forcing me to take on e4 because of the threat of e5. Pawn takes pawn, knight takes knight, and rook takes knight. And this is another important moment where I had to consider my options. The most obvious move, bishop f5, actually isn't so good because white simply plays rook e1, threatening knight h4, and black will probably have to cede the bishop pair, and white will simply have a very nice position with the two bishops. I didn't want to allow that, and so I played bishop h5, preserving my bishop for now. So white comes out from another angle, queen b3. Obviously the move b6 would be very dangerous for black because the long diagonal would become very weak, so I played rook b8. And now white simply retreats the rook from the central square where it can be hit by the bishop, and opens up the diagonal for his bishop. Now, of course, if I could, I would play a move like c5 to challenge white's center, but the problem here is tactical. White would play pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, and bishop f4. If the rook now moves off the b8 square, then the b7 pawn will be captured. But if black plays bishop d6, then the pin on the bishop becomes extremely unpleasant, as knight d5 doesn't actually solve the problem, since bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and c4 picks up the piece. So c5 actually would lose a pawn, and this is quite an important detail in the position, because it basically forces me to play c6 instead. So I played c6, and white plays knight e5. I played knight d5 to put a piece in the center, and to reposition it to f6, which is a much better square than e7. White temporizes with bishop d2, giving me a chance to move. Now knight f6 was perhaps a reasonable move, but I played rook e8, another move that made sense to me to get one more piece into the fray, and perhaps preparing f6 and bishop f7. White plays h3, a waiting move with some venom in it, because sometimes if white gets to play g4, the bishop on g6 could get stuck, as the white knight will be threatening to take it, but also if the queen moves away, h4 could become possible. So after h3, I didn't quite see what black wants to do, and I played perhaps too early the move queen c7. It was possible to play f6 and on knight c4 simply go back with the bishop to c7, planning to meet any white's active play with something like bishop f7 if needed, and perhaps even get active on the queen side with b5. White still would retain somewhat better chances, but I think this was the best way to play in this position. Instead I played queen c7, and now I really have to be careful. White begins a very forceful play. c4, knight f6, that's where my knight wanted to go in the first place, and now bishop b4. A fine move. Black realizes that if my dark-squared bishop is gone, it will be very difficult to defend, but it's hard to do anything. The move c5 right now could be met by simply bishop takes pawn, bishop takes bishop, pawn takes, queen takes, and even the position after a simple g4, bishop g6, rook d1 would be quite unpleasant. White can always take the bishop on g6, and can also prepare something like queen c3 followed b4, getting the extra pawn on the queen side to start working quickly. I was afraid of this position. I thought that I don't need to be clearly, maybe slightly but clearly worse, and so I played a waiting move, rook e to d8, hoping that my threats against the pawn on d4 would actually get me a good game. But I missed a very concrete sequence that possibly could give white a big advantage. White plays g4, bishop g6, and simply rook a d1. Now the threat seems to be bishop takes d6, and after something like a rook or queen recaptures on d6, h4, attacking the bishop on g6, and I couldn't quite find the right response, even though maybe it was here. For example, if I could just ignore white's threat and play bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and simply, for example, rook e8, planning to put another rook on d8, and if white plays h4, because my rook just protected this e-pawn, I can now play h5, and if white takes on g6, fg. Now, although white's position looks very good, it's not quite clear, because, for example, if white plays g5, black has the fine move knight g4, threatening some very serious counterplayer, and probably here black would already be winning. So white has to avoid that, probably by playing after h5, probably by playing g5. But now black has this fine resource, knight g4, knight takes, and pawn takes. And it's not that easy for white to actually get at this pawn on g4, because black can protect it both from the f5 or h5 squares with h4, from h5 tempo, and also sometimes play g3. And if white goes, for example, queen a3, black can simply continue to play in the center with rook b d8, because queen takes pawn would be dealt with by rook a8, followed by rook takes a2, or maybe even g3. So I think here black would have a fully equal position, and so the threat was actually illusory, and unfortunately I didn't realize that, and didn't find this very nice prophylactic move rook e8, which actually stops the threat of h4. Because I didn't find it, I found another move which is way worse. The move it was knight d7, and now my position really crumbles. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and only now h4. Now, because my knight has been removed from f6 by my own volition, I don't have this reply h5, so I have to do something else, but anything else I do will result in the loss of a pawn. So at this point I had to find the best way of losing a pawn. So when you're looking for the best way of losing a pawn, you have to find counter chances going forward. So let's see what I did. I played f6, f6, and now white plays c5, which is an excellent move. This forces my queen to go back, and only now knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, and rook takes e6, queen f7. Now although black now threatens knight takes c5, it's white's move, and he quickly resolves that problem. She quickly resolves that problem by playing rook e1, forcing me to look for. I'm sorry, not rook not rook e1, because knight f8 would actually be reasonable defense, right? Because the pawn on d4 is now hanging, but just retreating the rook back to e1. That's what white played. Just showed you another resource that black has in this position. Now I mean, white could also play rook d6, which was actually much stronger, because the rook would retain its active position. The best that black could really hope for is something like queen takes bishop, queen, pawn takes queen, g5 to at least get the advantage on the king side neutralized somehow. And after g5, white could play h5, knight f8, d5, rook takes rook, pawn takes, and black plays c5 to try to close off at least some lines, but white gets in from this side, rook e1, rook d8, rook e7, and after, for example, rook takes d6, rook takes b7, rook b6, rook takes the pawn on e7, rook takes b3, even something like bishop e4 would be quite strong for white, although the position is not quite over yet. So as you can see, black still has some chances, even against white's very affirmative play. But Rusudan played rook e1, which is also a reasonable move, retaining all her pieces in positions where she can control the outcome. And now I have to find the best chance. Queen takes queen. Now, if you're down a pawn, the first thing you have to think of is at least to break up your opponent's pawn structure. So you have to have some compensation for the pawn. So always look for the ability to ruin your opponent's pawn structure, even though it doesn't look like the doubling of the pawns on the b file is worsening the structure. In fact, it is, because in some endgames the double pawn will stop white from having a technical win. So always look for the avoidance of technical wins when you're down a pawn, which is what I did here. And now I played a5, fixing this weakness on b3. White is not in a rush, so she just improves the position of her king, plays king h2, and I play b6. Of course, just because white's not doing anything immediate doesn't mean that black, who is a pawn down, doesn't have to rush. In fact, if white improves the position of all his pieces, it'll be impossible to make any sort of attempts at counterplay. So I don't wait. I play as quickly as possible to get some counterplay here. And of course, white has a number of choices here. For example, she could play d5, knight takes c5, pawn takes pawn, and after rook takes rook, rook takes rook, king f7. Thanks to this move a5, my knight is at least safe on the c5 square, and of course white should play something rook d4, king e7 and b4, and after the exchange of the pawns, eventually white will get this knight off the c5 square, and it will be very difficult to defend this position. But at least I'm moving that inevitable moment further away, and sometimes your opponent will miss the opportunity to see his way, her way to a clear win. So at this point, after b6, instead of d5, white played bishop takes c6, and I took the pawn on c5. So white takes on d7, I take on d7, and white goes d takes c. So this is the position that white was aiming for. White's aiming for a technical position. A technical position being a position where you know that even though it's a difficult win, it's there. So Rusudan understood that if she can get off, she can get off a pair of rooks, she will know exactly what's going on in the position. So for example, she expected probably for me to go rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook b3, rook d2. But the problem is that now white gets his rook behind the pawn. So if, for example, rook b4, white of course ignores it and just plays rook c2 because black doesn't have the time to take the pawn on g4 as c6 with queen. Any other move would also lead to the rook coming behind the pawn, and the possible continuation could be something like, for example, rook b7, c6, rook c7, rook c2, king f7, king g3, king e6, king f4, king d6, h5, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, rook takes, king here. And if you look at the tempi, black is a few moves behind. Now this is far away, but it's easy to calculate because black doesn't actually have any other active plan except going for the to capture the c pawn. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying the attacker, the side that's on the offense, and in this case obviously white, always looking for very clear continuations which are calculable, and blacks, or in this case the defender's task is to find ways to make positions more muddy, more unclear, so that white has a chance to go wrong. So in this position I keep both rooks on the board. I play rook c7, and white plays rook c1. Again, rook b3 is the natural move to expect from black, but first of all, the capture of yet another double b pawn is not such a big deal, especially if white is able to solidify his extra pawn on c6. So I play rook b5 instead, trying to get this pawn closer to the to my king. c6, rook b6. Now I'm actually forcing white to do something else. For example, if white plays rook e6, I simply play king f7, and on rook e6, king e7, and clearly white has to lose this very important pawn on c6, giving me a lot more drawing chances. So seeing that, Rusudan correctly goes for another way of playing. Rook a8 check, king f7, and rook a8. Now this is quite interesting, because now of course I could take twice on c6. For example, rook takes c6, rook takes c6, rook takes c6, and after rook takes a5, play rook c2, picking up another pawn. But the problem here is that because of these pawns, which are actually located on a doubled, my position is quite bad, as white will very quickly get into an aggressive stance here by playing king g3, rook takes b2, rook b5, and then the plan is quite simple. White will move his king to e3, and then try to try to win by advancing the b pawn. And because the pawns are doubled, they don't actually present such a counter, such a usual countermeasures we find when we get pawns, for example, f, g, and h pawns against f, g, and h with one pawn on the b file. Even though even that position is difficult to hold, this kind of position could quite well be simply lost, which I believe during the game it was anyway. So so again, I don't go for the simplification. I keep it more complex, and I play rook takes b3. After white plays rook c2, and I play rook b5. I'm actually holding on. Again, of course, I could play rook b6, followed by taking the c pawn, but I decided to keep the a pawn to make it more complicated for white to utilize her advantage. So at this point, white improves the position of his king, and I do as well, and plays f3. I play g5, trying to fix the structure on the king side. And again, if now perhaps if we get into that ending that we looked at with the p pawn, with the pawn fixed on f3, possibly it would be more drawish than without me fixing those pawns up. So this is why I played g5, and white played h5. And here I started looking at this, and I realized that white actually needs a plan to make progress. Because if he doesn't do anything substantial, I can perhaps temporize as well. So I played this very strange looking move, king f7, actually moving the king away from the center of the board. But my idea was that now, if nothing happens, I can improve the position of my rook. For example, just shuffling the rook to between e5 and b5, and white would be hard pressed to show how he's going to make progress. So after king f7, this was a confusing enough move that white makes a mistake, after which the position turns into a draw. But perhaps yeah, the win isn't actually that simple. So let me show you first of all what white did and see why it's a draw. White played rook h8, and this allowed me the possibility of simply playing rook b6, and now coming back to a8 would actually not win at all, would not give white any winning chances, because I would simply take on c6, and now I would force white's rook into a very bad position, rook a2, and now simply by playing rook b3, it's clear why fixing the pawn with the move g5 was so important. The king can't actually leave, and white doesn't really have any other plan except for giving up the f-pawn. But let's say after king e2, perhaps king g8 even, king e2, king h7, king d2, rook takes pawn, b4 is still too early because of rook b3, black plays g6, in a couple moves f5, and his pass pawn on the g file will be enough to make a draw if white plays the best move. So after rook h8, rook b6, white played rook e2, I took on c6, and white played rook e8, perhaps thinking that rook f8 is a mating threat that cannot be stopped, but I have this resource, rook e7, and after rook ef8, king e6, the pawns are now finally even. h6, it's a combination, but it wins a pawn, but doesn't actually win the game. G takes h6, rook takes f6, king takes f6, rook h6, king g7, rook takes c6, rook b7, and now black simply let's see what rook e7, white played rook c5, hoping that I'll lose the pawn on g5, but I did. I defended. King g6, rook c6 check, king g7, rook c2, and the most easy way to draw is just to play rook b3 and followed up with the advance on the pawn to a3. So after rook b3, rook c5, king g6, rook c6 check, king g7. I'm sorry, no. Rook c5, king g6. White simply took on a5, and I took on b2, and white offered a draw after rook a6 check. So the position is obviously drawn at this point, and let's see what white missed when. So in this position, before playing rook h8, white had this. White had to go for a completely different type of play. He had to start playing very actively. He had to find another type of plan from what she was used to, because the simple plan of simply having a one-passed pawn on the queen side was stopped, and that forces the attacking side to find out some other way, and it's not that easy always to find another attacking way, but let's see how difficult it would actually be. So after rook d2, which was the correct move, instead of rook h8, the play could continue as follows. White threatens obviously rook d7 check. Black would have to stop it with rook e7, with the idea of answering rook d7 check with rook e7. And after rook d6, rook e6, rook takes rook, king takes rook, rook takes pawn, rook takes c6. Although it's possible that there are other ways of winning this position, I like to demonstrate the following way, which is quite instructive. Rook a7, rook b6, rook takes g7, rook takes b2, h6. Now black has to somehow stop the pawn. So here goes rook b1, h7, rook h1. And now white plays this move f4. Basically black has two options. He can hang around the h file, waiting for what's going to happen, or play g takes f4, which loses after king takes f4, and for example rook f1, king g3, rook h1, and white simply plays rook a7 check. And it turns out that, for instance, after king d6, simply rook a7 check, black either has to go to the 7th rank, after which rook a8 wins, since capturing on h7 would be impossible because of rook a7 check, or he has to go to the 5th rank, after which white simply plays rook a5, check king e6, and rook h5. So in both cases winning easily. So if instead of g takes f4, black plays simply rook h4, for example, then white wins by the following: f5 check, king e5, rook e7 check, king d5, let's say, and simply this ending is winning. Rook e6, rook takes pawn, rook takes pawn. Now the threat is rook g6, after which taking on g5 simply will win no matter where white's king is. So black has to stop it with the only move rook g7, but after white waits a bit, for example king f3, rook g8, rook e6. Now the king can't move away, because if king d4, rook g6 check, for example, rook g7, and now white simply plays rook e8. And now again the rook can't move away because of rook g6, and after king d4, white wins by bringing his king rook d. Gate check, king e5, king e3, king f6, rook d6 check, and king e5, rook e6, king d5, and finally rook e8. And black has to cede his position, and once the king goes to e4, he forces his way in, and white wins the game. So this is how white could have played, so that we can see that white's position was winning, but the various problems that I created by keeping the position complicated allowed me to save the game.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for onlinechesslessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.